Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the urban jungle tutorial that I'm making for AETUTs. In the first part we went over Buju and importing the scene into After Effects. Now we're going to concentrate on Mocha, how to make a roto and certain methods that I use while thinking about rotoing and applying track mats and just finishing up the scene. So let's get to it. So now I'm going to close these down and move on to the floor comp. So I'll go up to my project pane and navigate to the waves pre-comp, and I'll drag that down into the timeline, reposition it a little. We're going to lock this and we're going to make a new comp viewer. This way I can make adjustments in the pre-comp and view those adjustments within the composition I'm going to be rendering. I want to view the final composition in the right viewer, so I'll select it in the timeline and lock the composition tab. I'll select the element in the left viewer and move it to where I want while looking at the right composition viewer to see where the element is actually going to be placed within the final composition. I'm just going to make some space by moving the panels a little. I'll just run preview to make sure. And it's looking good. It's pretty straightforward for us to add leaves now. Let's make sure we're in the floor comp. We can delete the guide layers. Don't need those anymore. I'll select the leaf 1 composition and drag it onto the floor pre-comp viewer. Now I'll select the pan behind tool and reposition the anchor point to the very bottom of the element. Because now when I rotate it, it'll rotate from this point here. So I'm going to hit W and I'm going to rotate the layer. Hit V to get the selection. Move it into position. Here will do. Now I don't want this part here, so I'm just going to use a simple mask. Pen tool there. I'll turn the layer visibility off. It makes it easier for me to draw around the elements. Zoom in to make sure. Now I'm pressing Control, and this gives me the option to move the handles. I'm happy with that. Turn that on. Hit M for mask and just gonna invert it. And this switch here toggles the visibility of the masks. Okay, so that looks okay to me. Actually, I think it's too big, so I'm gonna go back into the layer. I'm gonna hit S to get the scale. And I'm gonna decrease it quite a lot. Hit M for the mask and put the switches back on. Now I'm gonna double click the mask and just drag it and reposition. Just repositioning the mask. Have that up here. I want to make this point here Bezier, so with the pen tool selected, I'm going to press Ctrl and Alt, left click and just drag the handles out, and I'll reposition it. Okay. So now I'm going to add leaf 2. Press Y, move the anchor point at the beginning of the layer, zoom in a touch, V, position it where I want. Gonna S, scale it down, turn the visibility off, just gonna mask around it. I shall carry on adding the elements and I will get back to you once I've finished. Okay, so they're all animated now. Sorry, they're all positioned. Now I have to offset the layers again so that they all seem to be growing off of this one big wave element. So I'll just make some room. I'll navigate down to the main waves layer. I'll solo that one. And I'll also solo the leaf 1 layer. So I'll scrub back and forth to see when it should begin its animation. Somewhere around here looks good. So I'll select it and move it to the right. Now I'll move on to leaf 2. So I'll solo that. Scrub back and forth to see when it should begin. By there looks good. Yep. And now I'll solo leaf 3 and do exactly the same thing. Yes, it's tedious, but you have to think of the finished outcome. It'll definitely be worth it. So I'm going to pause the screen capture now and get back to you when I've finished all these layers. Okay, that's finished. I'm just going to have a quick RAM preview just to make sure that they are animating on correctly. That is looking good. So in the timeline, I'm going to select any layer and press Ctrl A. That will select every layer within that timeline. And I'm going to pre-compose it by pressing Ctrl Shift C. And I'm going to call it Waves Pre-Comp 2. Okay. And now I'm going to duplicate it by pressing Ctrl and D. I'll just reposition it a touch. I also want to flip it vertically, so I'm going to go to Layer, Transform and Flip Vertical, which is new to After Effects CS4. I'll select the layer in the timeline and drag it to the bottom. And it's going to start by here. Sorry, wrong layer, bottom one. Like so. So if we just preview this. Okay, that looks good. It looks a bit too big here, so I'm going to scale it down quite a lot. As I'm making the adjustments, I'm always looking in the right composition window just to check the final outcome. So I'll reposition it and rotate it a touch. That's looking a little better. A quick preview now. It seems to be locked to the scene. It doesn't seem to be drifting at all, and that's good. Duplicate it again. Drag it to the bottom. I'm going to go to Layer, Transform, Flip Vertical again. I'm going to scale this down a little more. And it can come from here, so a little too small actually. Scale it up just a tad more. Okay, now a quick RAM preview of this. Okay, the floors layer is finished, and now we can move on to the wall layer. I'll select the wall pre-comp layer, hide the guide layer and drag into the timeline Waves Pre-Comp 2. Now I'm just going to rearrange my workspace so I can have a bit more room. So I can move the element in the right viewer, just watching the updates on the left. So I'll hit W to get the rotation tool, rotate it a touch. Now I'm just going to do this quick. That'll do. So I'm going to duplicate this again and move it to the other side. Hitting spacebar to pan. I'm going to move it again. I'm actually going to go up to Layer, transform and flip vertical. Hit W to get the rotate tool and rotate it, move it back into position. W, V. Okay, now I'm going to duplicate it once more. I pressed Control S instead of Control D, so I'll just let it save. Sorry about that. So I'll Control D to duplicate the layer again. I'll move it up, put it beneath the previous layer so it's behind it. I'm going to hit S, scale it down. Okay, and now I'm just going to scrub through to make sure they're animating on at the correct time. Okay, this one could animate on a little sooner. Yeah, so we go through this. These two need to be just a tad late. Okay, and this one, sorry, this one can start a little later. Okay, so I'll duplicate the layer again, put it underneath, and just move it over a touch. Now if this was for a client, I would add the elements singly like we did with the floor layer. I'm adding them as a group just to save some time. With that done, we'll head over to Mocha and apply some roto to him. Here we are in Mocha. Now Mocha comes free, well the AE version at least, comes free with the CS4 Creative Master Suite. If you've got CS3, then I just highly recommend that you upgrade to CS4 just for the Mocha plugin. Anyway, I'm not going to show you how to import sequences and the basic stuff, because if you go to the Imagineer Systems website, they've got a ton of tutorials that will teach you the basics and quite advanced stuff. I just want to explain rotoscoping to you for a moment. When you have a scene, always look through it. What you want to do is try and understand how the shape you are going to roto is moving, and also what you want to do is separate your roto shape into little pieces. So for instance, I'm going to roto his foot, his calf, his thigh, his torso, his upper arm, his forearm, his head, and even his hand. All these are going to be separate layers. You can see in the layer controls, and let me just bring it out for you. Right, you can see that I've rotoed his right arm, his wrist, his left arm. I've rotated each part of the shape separately, and this is very, very crucial. You have to roto things separately. It's going to be a lot easier for you, and if you need to correct things later on, it would be a lot easier to correct a portion of the roto than the whole thing. So that's a habit you must get into. Okay, so if you're wondering why you don't see any roto shapes on the actual layer, it's because they're all switched off right here. If I switch the hand and highlight it, now I can press Z and it'll bring the zoom tool. Now all I have to do is left click and scroll the mouse, and now if I press X, it'll bring me the hand tool. Now I can just pan around. So let me just pull this over to the side so we can see that just the hand has a lot of keyframes, even though it's tracked in. Okay, so now I'll turn on the visibility of the thumb and the wrist, if I can find them. The right arm thumb roto and right arm wrist. So we can see that just for this one portion we have 3 separate layers. Secondly, always start on the hardest frame. What I mean by that is that start on a frame that uses the most points. For instance, here, you can see that here, the shape that the hand has at the moment is using the most points. Let me show you a different example. If I'll go down to his legs. Now we can see this is quite smooth by here, so you're not going to need a lot of points to actually roto this. You'll need one here, one here, one here, one here, here, okay? But if we move along, just to see the other shapes that it has, I mean here you can see that this is probably one of the hardest shapes of the trouser leg, and it's going to need a lot more points. So here is quite uneven. It's going to need some points too. So as you're viewing the actual what you have to roto, make sure you start the roto on the frame that has the most complex shape. I'll just navigate to the layer control so I can turn on the leg layer, so it's just a little easier to see. This shape would only need 1, 2 and 3 points. Now these additional points are here only because they have to take care of shapes such as this, you see. So if you start on this shape, then you can always accommodate this shape. But if you start on a shape that's easy, like this for instance, you're not going to be able to accommodate the more complex shapes because you can't add points to a roto shape. No, you can add them, but it's hard to add them once you've started animating the shape already. So, just a quick recap of my workflow when I'm rotoing. This workflow is not specifically for Mocha, it's just for rotoing in general, whichever application you choose. So what I do when I've imported the sequence is I'll scrub through it a few times to try and familiarize myself with the movement, and I try and determine how many shapes I'm going to need to actually roto it successfully. I then choose which roto shape I'm going to roto first, and I tend to choose the hardest shapes because it's such a tedious job. I just prefer to for it to get easier for me as I go along. So I consider the legs to be the hardest because of all the folds and creases in the material. So let's just say I'm going to choose the right thigh by here. Let me unsolo it. So once I've chosen which roto shape I'm going to start with, I again scrub through it to try and familiarize myself with its movement and how the creases of the clothing react to the wind and stuff like that. Okay, I then look for the most complex part. I shouldn't have turned it on. Let me turn it off. Which is probably here. So this is the most complex part. So it's frame 50. So I'll just make a note of that. And what I then do once I'm inside Mocha is do a rough spline around the shape, like this. Let me unsolo it. So I'll do a rough spline, and then I'll track this by using the track forward, or I'll track it frame by frame depending on how hard the track is. So once that's tracked, as it is here, I then choose the frame which I noted down, which was frame 50. Let me just get to frame 50. Right. I then create a new layer and roto. I'm just zooming a touch. And then create can be a bit fiddly trying to choose these. And then I just roto it out very, very closely and very precise. What I sometimes do, which I haven't actually done in this shape, but I can remember doing it on the calf. So let me just find the calf. Oops, sorry about that. And I'll unsolo it and highlight it. See, what I've done on the calf is I've actually added a few extra points where it would overlap another roto shape. So obviously I'd roto the foot out here, and this would be the overlapping. So I'd add a couple of points just in case I needed them, just in case I misunderstood which frame I chose to be the most complex. So whether you've got After Effects CS4 with the Mocha plugin or not, this is the workflow I chose, and it seems to work for me. So you scrub through the entire sequence to try and figure out how many parts you need to make the shape, and then you select a shape. I like to choose the most difficult one, so as I progress it gets easier for me. I then track the rep spline. Once that's tracked, I add a new layer and apply the precise roto to that, and link the roto layer to the track layer. So the roto layer will use the tracking data of the ref spline to move it, and then I just readjust the points where necessary. Okay, so what do we do now with all this information inside Mocha, and how do we transfer it to After Effects? Well, if you're using Mocha AE, there is only one output option, and that is to render these sequences, these roto shapes, sorry, as a matte. So we do that by going to the file. Let me just bring this over a touch. File, and we choose render. I uncheck the color and I choose matte, and now you choose which layer you want to export. Sorry. So I don't want to export the tracks because they're just rough splines. I want to export the roto. Okay, so I'll choose those, and I'll just go through all of these and choose all of the roto layers. I'm not going to do it at the moment. So and then you choose which frame you want to start and which frame you want to end at. I like to export them as image sequences. So then you click next, and you set the output directory, and you can add a prefix and suffix and the extension, which is I like to just do it in JPEG. Then you click finish, and then it'll render out. The render percentage will come here, and it'll say render in frame blah blah blah, and it'll give you a percent and how long it's going to take by here. Okay, so this is what my mattes folder looks like. As you can see, I've rendered out each shape individually, and this just gives me a lot more freedom in After Effects. I'll explain that later. So let's just head over to After Effects. I've imported the matte sequences already. You import those the same as you would any other sequence. What I'm going to do now is select any one of these. I'll just choose the top one and drag it over to the create new comp, and I'll create a new comp and open that comp up in the timeline. Now I'll marquee select the rest of the matte layers and just drag those into the timeline, and nothing happens, and that's because they're all set to normal, the blend modes. So I'll control click the body to add that to the selection and change the blend mode to add. And now you can see the matte's working perfectly. Now I'm going to rename the comp matte, matte, and I'll head over to the final rendered comp, which is Square Urban Jungle. And at the moment we can't apply this matte to the wall pre-comp because the shelter matte is already applied to it. So what we have to do is pre-compose these two layers. So I'll control click to select them both and press Control Shift C. I'll rename this wall pre-comp 2, and we shall press F4 if we don't see the collapse transformations switches, and collapse the transformations for that, and I'll just pop them back in. Now what we can do is apply the man matte, drag it into the timeline, hit F4 to bring up the blend mode tabs, and apply it as a Luma matte. Nope, sorry, Luma matte inverted we need. So there we have it. If we scrub through, we'll see that it works perfectly. At the moment, of course, this isn't working. That's because we haven't yet applied a matte for that. So again, we're going to select the man matte, drag it down above the floor pre-comp and select that to Luma inverted matte. So now he's cut out totally. Our next option is to change the blend mode to overlay, just so that the wall integrates a bit more. That didn't work at all. I chose the wrong one. I need to change the wall pre-comp 2 to overlay, and this will just integrate with the scene a lot more. Now, going back to why I rendered each of the shapes out separately, was so I had more control. And now what I mean is, if, say for instance, I wanted to add one of these elements, and I wanted to add it as though it was as though it appeared to be between his legs. Well, if we had rendered if we would have rendered the shape out as a whole, we wouldn't have been able to do it. We would have had to have gone back into Mocha and re-rendered the shapes we needed. But because we went to the trouble to render out each of these separately, we don't have to. So what we'll do is grab any of these. Sorry, no, not any of them. I shall grab the right foot and drag it onto the Make New Composition button. Then I'll drag the right calf and right thigh, and I'll rename it right leg matte. Okay, so let's go back into the main comp, and now we shall just go up to the leaf comps, choose any leaf. So I'm going to toggle the switches here by pressing F4. I'm going to make it a 3D layer and hit P on the floor now, Control copy that, and Control paste it. Now I'm not going to worry too much about its position, so it will slip, but this is just a demonstration of why I decided to render them out separately. And hit S for the scale and bump the scale up a bit, just take it down. So now what we can do is navigate down to the right leg mat and just place it on top. And we forgot to set the blend modes for the mats. So we'll go to the right leg mat, select them all, and just have them as additive blend mode. Now we'll go back to the urban square jungle, and we'll hit F4 to bring up the blend mode tabs. I'll change this to a Luma inverted matte. Okay, so as we scrub through, you'll notice that I actually chose the wrong leg. Okay, let's double click in this. I'm going to delete those legs, and let's get the left foot left. Okay, let's get all those. We'll select them all, change them to the add mode, and now we'll see that it looks as though it's between his. Let's just move it down just a touch. Now it looks as though it's between his legs. Okay, so that's why I decided to render these out separately, just in case I wanted to do this. Okay, I'll just delete these two. What I forgot was to add some shelter elements to the shelter, so we'll do that now. We'll head over to the shelter pre-comp 1, get rid of these layers, we don't need those anymore, and drag the waves pre-comp 2 down to it, and hit W, just rotate it so it's facing the opposite direction, and that'll do. Now if we go back to the square jungle and turn on the visibility of the layer, and for the final effect is just to make the background black and white and the man, keep him in color. So I'll shy these actually, we don't need those anymore. Now I'm going to duplicate the man footage. I'm going to select the bottom one, and in the effects panel, I'm going to tap in HUE. I'm going to drag the hue and saturation effect onto the bottom layer and just drag the saturation down so it becomes black and white. And now I'm going to drag the man matte above the man footage, above the coloured man footage, and hit F4 to bring up the blend mode tabs, and I'm just going to select inverted matte. Wrong, Luma inverted matte. That concludes part 2 of the Urban Jungle tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. As I said, it's my first tutorial, so as I make more, hopefully I'll get better. I don't claim to be an expert, I'm just somebody who spends a lot of time tinkering in After Effects. Don't forget to check out the AETUTS user group. It's www.vimeo.com/groups/AETUTS. So check it out, become a member, post in the forums, ask for tutorials, whatever you want. I'll see you there. Okay, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.